Episodes of the Green Corn Rebellion Show are sponsored by Oklahoma Progress Now. Oklahoma Progress Now is a 501c4 organization focused on building progressive power in Oklahoma. Their primary efforts are on developing progressive content for a 21st century audience, coalition, and capacity building across progressive organizations and causes, and working to see elected leaders who are more responsive to their constituents and the needs of the many. Areas of focus include progressive messaging and communications, coalition building and resource sharing, and focused progressive policy goals. You can check out their Twitch live streams, and they go live on Facebook on at noon, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Please support this organization. It's a really great organization. It's just getting started here in Oklahoma. Thank you. Now enjoy the rest of the video. Hello, this is the Green Corn Rebellion Show, and today I am here with Rob Rousseau, who is the host of Insurgents Podcast and the 49th Parahell. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. I just grilled a little bit, ate some dinner. I'm sitting in my basement, which is very, very hot. I just had to change my shirt because it was all sweaty. So now I've got a fresh tea. I'm ready to go here.
That's good. That's real good.
Oh, yeah.
So first thing I have here is, so you live in Canada.
Yes.
Ever since I was a little kid, I've had an obscure fascination with Canada. Like when I was like little, it used to be like because of the climate, because it's a lot cooler there than it is here in Oklahoma, and also because you guys had single payer. Because I watched Sicko when I was like 9, and I was like, oh, Canada's like way better than America. So
Yeah.
like, but then as I got older, I got more interested with your politics as a whole, because your Liberal Party is, I mean, they're not great, but like they're still to the left of the Democrats here. And, then you guys have the New Democratic Party, which is like amazing. So my first question is, why do you think NDP has never had a majority in government, even though one of your most revered people in Canadian history is Tommy Douglas, who was a member of NDP?
Yeah, and the sort of grandfather of single-payer healthcare here in Canada.
Yeah.
It's tough to say. Honestly, I think there's just sort of the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party kind of have a duopoly over our political process in this country. It's similar to the Republicans and Democrats, where they each kind of like take turns governing the country. And as much as the NDP, I think, would be a nice alternative to that, I think for certain institutional reasons, they're kind of held back from going as far into that like social democratic zone as they need to go to really like differentiate themselves. I think there's people like in the top brass of the NDP. There's some great like members of parliament and great activists within the party, but the people kind of pulling the strings in the party like apparatus, they're kind of determined just to be a Liberal Party light and to not stray too far left and to kind of like just convince middle of the road Canadians that they're not these crazy scary lefties, but they're the responsible. They can be kind of centrist and responsible too. And there's no constituency for that. I think if you like that, if that's the kind of politics that you're into in Canada, you tend to vote for the Liberal Party. And as such, they've never really been able to try and create a lot of excitement on the left by really leaning into that. You saw a bit of that in the last election, but it was really only taking place over the last couple of weeks of the actual election campaign. And I think their actions previous to that didn't really convince a lot of people that that's what they were going to really stand for, that really strong social democratic element. And also the fact is there's the people in the Liberal Party in Canada, just like with the Democrats in the United States, will say like, well, if you don't vote for us, you're giving it to the Conservatives, and they scare people like that, and they say like, well, we're the only ones between you and the scary Conservatives who are going to take away all your all your rights and everything. And people really believe that. And that's how they've managed to kind of maintain a stranglehold on power here for a long time.
Yeah, because I remember, like, I started following Canadian politics around, I want to say 2014, 2013, somewhere in there, like in the mid 2010s.
Yeah.
And I remember in the 2015 election, like, it looked like NDP might have had a chance. And then what was it that happened? Like, the leader of NDP was like promising to keep austerity going or something like that. I don't remember what it was that happened.
Yeah, well, I think that was pretty much like you pointed out. You're exactly right. That was kind of their election to lose. They had kind of like worked their way up to become sort of the official opposition party. The Liberal Party was kind of like almost wiped out totally, and that's when they elected Justin Trudeau as their leader. And then the really inexcusable thing that happened in that election is that the NDP, in an effort to show people, like I was saying, that they're not the scary lefties and the communists or socialists or whatever, they really made an effort in that election to be like, we're the reasonable, centrist, moderate party, and they allowed Justin Trudeau to sound like he was the progressive one, and they were the ones that were investing in all this stuff, and they were talking about running in deficits and legalizing weed and doing electoral reform and all these things that have been kind of off the table for a long time. And Justin Trudeau, no matter what you want to say about him, he's very, very good at sounding convincing when he talks about this kind of stuff. And honestly, he did manage to make a lot of people, especially a lot of young people in 2015, believe that was like the progressive choice. And it was indefensible, because I think that was the NDP's election that they could have won, but they're so, like I mentioned, they're so obsessed with appearing to be like reasonable and not a scary left-wing party that they allowed Trudeau to get to their left on a number of issues, and that's what got them a huge majority. And Trudeau's walked back a lot of that stuff, a lot of his stuff with like reconciliation with Indigenous communities, with environmentalism, with electoral reform. He kind of just said, after he got elected, he was like, oh, by the way, we're not going to do that stuff. And the NDP still hasn't really been able to capitalize on that and really like build a big constituency of like disaffected young people, for instance, that might be willing to hear about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I was about to ask about that. So in the closest time the NDP ever got to being in government was around 2011 when they became an official opposition. This was like kind of a little bit before I started following Canadian politics.
Yes.
So what was that like whenever they were like the official opposition and it looked like they could possibly eventually become the government?
Well, it was exciting at the time. Like, this is at the time we had a conservative government for many years, and that a lot of people were really tired of it. And the odd thing that happened was Quebec, where I lived, which is like French Canada, had never really voted for the NDP before. It was always just like they voted elements of, like, segments of Montreal where I live voted for the Liberal Party, and if pretty much everyone else voted for the Bloc Québécois, which is just like a political party that's designed to advance the interests of people in Quebec. But something kind of very crazy happened in that election, which is that kind of almost like a huge percentage of voting constituencies in Quebec kind of decided on a dime, we're going to support the NDP in this election because we hate the Conservatives. We want to get rid of them. They look like they have a good opportunity to do that. And oddly enough, if the rest of Canada had kind of followed through on that, they probably would have won that election and become the official and become the leadership of the country. But because the rest of Canada didn't really follow suit and didn't really support that same kind of orange wave, as it was called, they ended up just becoming the official opposition, which was exciting at the time also, because if you support the NDP, it was cool to see them rise to that level. But it's also worth pointing out that the leader at that time, Jacques Layton, who was a very charismatic guy and a great leader of the party, who managed to, was very successful as a leader of the party, but was also kind of a centrist as well, and was not really campaigning on this big, broad left-wing platform, but he was kind of campaigning as like, I can be a moderate, a reasonable sort of more of a centrist type. And so that's what I think. It was exciting, but at the same time, it's not like they were running as campaign as this big, exciting left-wing project. It was very much, like I said, it was the version of the NDP that I think a lot of the people in the NDP establishment would like to see, which is like, we're like the Liberals, but maybe a little bit more left-wing on a number of things, but nothing too scary, nothing too, you don't need to worry about it too much. And that was kind of how they built up their biggest electoral success. So it was exciting, but I'm not sure, even if the NDP had won that election in that iteration, it's not like it would have meant this big transformative change. They weren't really campaigning on a big kind of transformation. It was more of a milquetoast, moderate centrist platform.
That's interesting. So how do you feel about the NDP's current leadership and how the things are going?
Well, there's been ups and downs. I joined the NDP in like 2016, I guess, so I could vote in the leadership election, and I voted for Nikki Ashton, who's an NDP member of parliament, who was kind of running as like, I'm going to be the Bernie Sanders candidate. That's the kind of message I'm going for. And, a lot of people were really excited about that, but she ended up not winning that election, and who won was this guy, Jagmeet Singh, who is a very cool guy. He's very charismatic. He's got a lot of good ideas, especially when it comes to like criminal justice and stuff. He's really good at talking about that stuff. He's a visible minority. He's a Sikh, so he was a very historic leader. He's the first kind of person of color that's been the leader of a political party in this country. And I think I like him a lot. He's a good, he's charismatic. He seems like a cool guy. He's got a number of good ideas. And in the election campaign, the most recent one, I thought he did a great job of actually advancing this agenda and talking about things like income inequality and, taxing the wealthy. And I think he was saying all the right things, but for a number of other reasons, it didn't really materialize into a huge gain. Even though they did become they're kind of propping up the liberal minority government in this time, but they actually lost seats in that election. Okay, partially because of Quebec. I mentioned Quebec, the Orange Wave. Yeah. That was the reason that it didn't work out in this election, because that Quebec just kind of ditched the NDP after that kind of brief, courtship between Quebec and the NDP. This time they wanted nothing to do with it, and so they lost a lot of seats in Quebec, and that eliminated any chance they had to make big gains. Even though I thought the campaign that they ran was really solid.
Okay, and I was about to ask, who are some other Canadian politicians that you think are great? Like, I was about to mention Nikki Ashton. I really like her. She seems pretty great.
Yeah. Well, in Quebec, we're like a really left-wing party to vote for, like in our provincial elections, Québec Solidaire. And that's led by someone named Manon Massé. And Québec Solidaire is a really interesting party. It's very kind of like unapologetically left wing. They're very, very strong in the environment, and they've managed to come from being kind of a fringe party in Quebec to become like one of the main opposition parties here. And so Manon Massé has been a great leader for them. I think she's kind of like a funny, charismatic, Quebecois woman. They've got a number of really interesting ideas and a lot of great activists and members of the party. So I think that's been an exciting development here in Quebec, because there's been a strong kind of social democratic element in time, and a very kind of strong element of unions and social democracy here. So that's been an exciting development. I would like to see them hopefully do better in the next provincial election, which I'm not sure when that's going to be, because we also have like kind of a right-wing business here in charge here, which has been frustrating on a number of levels. And the rise of Québec Solidaire, though, has been a really exciting and I think like hopeful story. There's a lot of great people in that party, and Manon.
You broke up a little bit there. What was it you just said? I couldn't hear the last part you said.
Oh, just that it's been an exciting development. There's a lot of great activists and a lot of great people involved with the party, and that's something that in the next provincial election, I'm hoping they can continue to make more gains on it. And Manon Messé and her leadership, I think, has been pretty vital to that.
That's cool. So how do you feel about Canada and how they're handling the coronavirus compared to America?
Well, like a lot of things, it looks good in comparison to America because America is such a disaster a lot of the time. It hasn't been ideal. I think in Quebec we got hit very hard by coronavirus, partially because, not totally because of the incompetence of the people in charge, but because our March break is a week earlier. It's like right at the beginning of March, like literally, and Quebec people go everywhere. They go all over the states and all over the place. So this was right before the pandemic really began and when it became evident to everyone how serious it was. So I think right at that, as that was happening, you had many people in Quebec coming back to the province after having traveled all throughout the states and bringing it here, especially here to Montreal. So they did take, I think, a number of steps right away to make sure that everything was locked down, and I think the response for the first couple of months was quite good. The difficulty is, though, it is like anywhere there, it's a capitalist party in charge, and they're now, even though I don't think it's totally safe to do so, and I think a number of public health safety experts don't believe it's a good idea to do so, but they're opening the economy back up here as well. They opened up schools and daycares and everything.
Oh, wow.
And so that kind of remains to be seen whether that's going to lead to a second spike or a second wave of coronavirus, or if we're going to have to lock down again. No one really knows, but that's what I would say the response has been on the provincial side anyway. Here in Quebec, initially it was good, but I think they've like everywhere in North America, I think they've not gone on long enough, and they're kind of very anxious to kind of get things going again. On a federal side, the response has been okay. Trudeau has not been great on this, but because the NDP is in the minority, they're the kind of minority party propping up the Liberal Party, they've been able to push them on a number of ways to make the response better. Like the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, or the CERB, which is $2,000 a month for people that are affected by this. At first, it was very, very means tested, and it was kind of like it excluded a lot of people. And because of the NDP pushing them on this, it became available to a lot more people. It hasn't been perfect, definitely. I would like I don't want. I'm always like afraid of the Liberal Party of Trudeau too much on this stuff. It's definitely, like, again, it's been better than America sending everybody one $1,200 check and then being like, okay, yeah, go back to work. That's fine. So yeah, I guess compared to that, it's been better. But I think it would have been better just to make this whole benefit universal to begin with. But Liberals can't help but means test everything and make sure that you can't make one extra dollar that you don't deserve or whatever. So that's it. I think it's been, on a provincial level, on a federal level, it's been not bad. I would say better than America's, but I think a lot of the time in Canada we're kind of measuring our response to things like this, or measuring how things are going compared to America, which is such a low bar that it's not difficult to surpass that. So I would have liked it to be better, but I can't complain too much. I've qualified for the CERB. It's been helpful to me, but I know there's a lot of people that didn't qualify and that got kind of means tested out of it, which is now kind of bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah. So now let's talk about America. I remember earlier this year, whenever it looked like Bernie was going to win the primary, you as a Canadian seemed almost as excited or even more excited than Americans here about that. And then whenever it looked like he was going to lose or started losing, you seemed as disappointed, if not more disappointed, that some people here in America were.
Yeah, I was very emotionally invested in this. Yeah.
Yeah, so could you talk about how you felt about the Bernie campaign and how you as a Canadian felt so strongly about it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, number one, I think if you look at the kind of United States over the last 50 years and their role in the world, especially when it comes to like imperialism. I view the United States as kind of like an imminent threat. They've destabilized the whole regions of the world. In terms of climate change, they've been like leading the way on leading us right to the brink of like complete climate breakdown. So I think, so everyone around the world is kind of invested in what happens with the United States government. And I think Bernie Sanders kind of represented a possible different vision for what America could be in climate, when it comes to climate change, when it comes to imperialism. Like he's talking about kind of ramping down the imperialism and bringing troops home. And so I think as a Canadian, I think that was something that I was really excited about, because it represented kind of a different path for America, which makes it makes everyone more safe. It makes people in Canada more safe and people all around the world. So that's why I think that was the main reason I was invested in that. I feel like I had something else to say and I forgot. Was there a second part to your question, or did I leave something?
No, just how you what is it? How you felt about the Bernie campaign itself, I guess, and then how you as a Canadian felt so strongly about it.
Oh yeah, okay. So I just remembered what I wanted to say. Thanks for jogging my memory. Because it's not just about America's role. I think the reason I really supported Bernie was because I was hoping that that different direction for America would have had a really profoundly positive benefits for Canada and the whole world. But also politically, like I was mentioning, there's people in the NDP that I think understand why Bernie is popular and that want to bring that kind of vision to the NDP and campaign like that. But there is a whole centrist establishment here in the media, in the NDP, that are really, really opposed to it, just like in the United States, that really like don't want to go too far with anything. Oh, that's like electoral suicide. You don't want to go too far. You don't want to scare away the middle of the road people, all that kind of stuff. And Bernie winning, I think, would have been kind of a proof of concept to people here as well, that like, oh, you can run like that. You can run it just like an unapologetically left campaign. You don't have to play these fucking games and try to appeal to these moderates that hate you anyways, that are never going to support you. You can really go all the way in on this kind of bold vision and bring in young people and bring in people that aren't involved in the political process. So if you're someone in Canada that's been frustrated by the fact that there is really no left here, there's no real left representation in the government. You have the kind of political establishment that's paralyzed and unwilling to do that kind of stuff. Bernie possibly winning was really, really exciting because it would have shown people that like, oh, you can do this. Like you can run like this and you can win. So it's not just about Bernie and the effect that he would have had on America and the rest of the world, but it would have just shown people here and elsewhere also that like, this is kind of the way of the future. This is what the young people are where they're going. And it would have shown people that are paralyzed with fear about going in that direction, that it's actually not only is it morally good, it's morally like the way you want to be, but it's also electorally it's a winner as well. So that was just to sum up. Not only would Bernie have winning have really positive effects on the U.S., kind of change the direction of the United States, which would have made, I think, everything a little bit more secure, would have made everyone a little bit safer. But it would have been a proof of concept for people in this country that are kind of paralyzed to try and run that kind of a campaign. It would have shown them that was not only morally a good thing to do, but a winning electoral strategy as well. So those are the kind of main reasons that I was so emotionally invested in that.
Okay. Were you as invested in Jeremy Corbyn in 2019 whenever he was running?
Yeah, absolutely. I think after 2016 and Trump winning, it was a really kind of depressing time. And I was one of those people that was kind of saying, well, I think Bernie would have beat Trump if he hadn't been kind of sandbagged by the Democratic Party in the 2016 primary. Yeah. And when Corbyn had that really surprising result in 2017, it was kind of a proof of concept that like, oh, you like I was just saying, you can run on this and really you can all he didn't win, but he had a really positive result. And as we saw recently, one of the main reasons he didn't win because there was people in his own party that were making sure that he wouldn't win.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think like no matter where you live, your politics, if your political process has been kind of dominated by neoliberalism for the last 40 years, like it has been in the UK, in the United States, in Canada, seeing someone that's not like a far right psychopath make a dent in that was really exciting.
Yeah.
Because it was just like it's proof that these people are not invincible, and that you don't have to win elections against the right by being this kind of triangulating dipshit and trying to like take all these conservative ideas but put nice liberal language around them. But you can really win with like a really bold agenda about redistributive economics and boosting the welfare state and anti-imperialism and all these things. It was kind of proof that like, oh, you can run and win like that. So that's it. It's like anywhere I think that someone running that kind of a campaign has managed to make a dent in this like never-ending neoliberal hegemony. It was really, really exciting. Which is why the result in 2020 for Bernie was depressing, and why the result in 2019 for Corbyn was very, very depressing as well.
Yeah, like for me, like I've been following UK politics for a long time too, like ever since 2013, somewhere in there. And I followed Corbyn's leadership election in 2016, 2015, that summer. I was
Yeah.
really excited about that whenever he won, and won so overwhelmingly too.
And then they tried to do a coup and get rid of him, and he won
Yeah,
even more convincingly.
yeah, and then whenever 2017, that election, I remember staying up all night and watching all the results come in, and I was like, "Oh, look at this! They got so close."
Yeah.
And then 2019 came, and it was more of a Brexit election, and which is
Yep.
surprising because Brexit was like supposed to happen a million years ago, but they're still
Yes.
talking about it. And so, and then whenever Labor lost, and people tried to say, "Oh, they lost because they were too far left, and that means we can't have Bernie as the nominee." I'm like, no, 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 no. Like, I was following this election. It was not because Corbyn was too far left. It was because of Brexit. It was his Brexit position that was the problem. So, like, the equivalent to that here in America would be like if Bernie was good on everything else, but like he supported NAFTA and TPP. Like, that would be
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
similar comparison, but like Bernie doesn't have that problem. And Bernie's not, equally hated as Jeremy Corbyn is by like most people in the UK for whatever reason, because, the media's, characterization of Bernie Sanders, while it might not be a positive one, it didn't affect people's brains to the point where everyone hates him, because he's still like one of the popular people in the country. Unlike Corbyn, he's not. So like there was some like analogous things to look at, but I still thought that like, Corbyn, if he had a chance or had won, that would have sent a signal to people in America that like, oh, we can have Bernie Sanders as the nominee and he can win.
Yeah.
And what was the other thing I was going to say about Corbyn in the UK?
Well, I think your point about the media is really important too, because like you pointed out, the media was a big problem in this 2020 election with Bernie, in terms of like manufacturing consent for Joe Biden.
Yes.
And kind of like signaling to all the liberals that watch MSNBC all day, Bernie, whatever, he's great, but he's just not electable. He's never going to be electable. He's too crazy. He's too radical and out there. Biden, electable, super electable, even if he's like falling over his feet and he can barely talk and he's bleeding out of his eyeball and stuff. They're like, look at this great presidential. And that has the people. There's a lot of, I think, liberals that vote in Democratic primaries that's where they take their cues from. But it's like a totally different infrastructure in the UK, where you've got this like vicious. It's just this pure right wing press that. It's not only that Corbyn's not electable, but he's like a terrorist sympathizer, and he's anti-Semite. All these like really vicious smears about him. And when you talk to like activists in the UK with the Labour Party that were pro Corbyn and going to knock on doors, that's what they heard. They're like, oh, he's like a nutcase terrorist sympathizer, and just like that's really hard to convince people, I think, when that's the impression that they have of somebody, even though he's a guy that spent his whole career being anti-racist, campaigning. He was on the right side of history on all these big important historical events like apartheid, but still, according to the UK press, he was this like racist nutcase, and that's what most people believed.
Yeah, and the other thing I think is different in terms of the media in America and in the UK, like there's very little independent media, like leftist media in the UK compared to America. So like in America, we have all these different podcasts and YouTube shows on the left, but in the UK, they don't have as much of that. So like it's way harder for them to be able to combat what's being said in the media about the left or Labor or Corbyn and stuff like that. But in America, it's like, oh, we have several different shows that you could go to online that will tell you what's actually going on.
Yeah, and it was still nowhere close to enough. That was the kind of thing that I think I was disappointed with and kind of depressed by after this election, because that was kind of my thinking, which is that, obviously the corporate media is never going to come around to Bernie. They're going to be against him from minute one, but maybe there is now kind of enough of an infrastructure there with all the podcasts and all the different people that are trying to create an alternative to that you can kind of fight against it. And as we saw, though, I think it's still nowhere near enough, and that the people that, the corporate media in the US still has a ton of sway and influence in terms of being able to change people's perceptions about what is and what isn't possible. And I think there has been a lot of progress made in terms of building up like alternatives to that, but clearly it wasn't enough, because I think a lot of people still took their marching orders from the MSNBCs and the CNNs and the very establishment kind of corporate media there.
Yeah, there's also an age gap when it comes to media consumption.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
like if you're over the age of like 45 or 40, you're more likely to get your news from CNN and MSNBC and stuff like that. But if you're under the age of 40, you're more likely to get your news from podcasts and YouTube shows on the internet. So, and then, the turnout for young people was higher in this primary prior to previous elections, but also the turnout of like older people like was even bigger than that. And so that like it kind of makes me think that sometime like in the future it'll probably be easier for a leftist candidate in order to win a Democratic primary on the national stage, because some people just have to age out.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And even a lot of the older people, even though there was a big generational divide, if you looked at the like exit polls for a lot of these primaries where Biden won, things like Medicare for all and all these broad, free college and all these broad policies were really popular. But I think there's a lot of people in the Democratic Party, especially older people, that are just like, I just want Trump gone. That's my main thing that I care about. The media has told me that Biden's the one that's going to do that and that Bernie can't do it. So that's what I'm voting for. It has nothing to do with policies or anything.
Yeah,
and it seems like that's how most people kind of made their decision.
Yeah, and that's what I think, like the people on the left, we underestimated, people, the Democrats, we underestimated their wanting to get Trump out of office above all other things. Yeah. Because some people, they keep trying to phrase it as if it's, oh, just Democrats are against socialism and they're against all those ideas. I'm like, no. Like, they're not against like the policies. They just wanted Trump out. And if you're watching MSNBC 24/7, you're only going to hear that Biden's the most electable person. So therefore, you're going to vote for Biden regardless of whatever he believes in terms of policy. Because I'm active within the Democratic Party here in my own state. And I know for a fact that most people are in favor of these progressive policies. But I know plenty of people that voted for Biden just because they thought he was more electable and they didn't think Bernie was electable. So it was definitely the electability thing that ended up killing Bernie's chances, even though he won the first 3 primaries. And that was huge. That was unprecedented.
I was very excited. Yeah, and that's another thing that the media did too, is after Nevada and Bernie's big win, the media, like, there was kind of a point where the media could have come out and said, like, well, I guess he is electable. Like, look at this amazing coalition that he's putting together of young people and immigrants and all these different folks that are coming together to support this. And I'll never forget this, which is that after Nevada, this big blowout victory, the whole week was spent in the media talking about Bernie Sanders supported Cuban literacy programs in the 80s, and that was the whole news cycle.
Yeah.
After 3 big primary wins and this big historic kind of movement that was building, it's like Cuban literacy programs. I can't believe Bernie Sanders would ever praise vicious, brutal Cuban dictators. And then it's like, then the Biden wins South Carolina, and then it's like, oh, electable, and then that was pretty much the end of it.
Yeah, like that was a good, like that was like in my lifetime over the last 4 years, 4 or 5 years that I've been following politics closely, there was never a better time than that whole week before and after, during and after Nevada, where the media on MSNBC, they were just so sad and depressed that Bernie Sanders had won. And oh my God, and Chris Matthews talking about how he was afraid
Yeah.
he was going to get like assassinated in Central Park. Like that was such a great, like that was such a beautiful time in American
If that was
politics,
actually on Bernie's platform, he would have won in a landslide, I think. Because
right?
I actually supported that. Yeah.
But yeah, like that was such like an amazing time in politics, and I never felt any better about literally anything in my entire life than that whole point in time where it was like, oh, we're actually gonna do this. Like this is
Yeah,
like
yeah.
we're almost a shoe-in, because then there was like the polls were showing that he was basically the favorite in every state except for like South Carolina, and then South Carolina when Clyburn endorsed Biden, and then after that it was just downhill after that. And but
Well, and
like
then you had a certain situation too where Pete Buttigieg, even though he was the only one that had come close to winning a primary, and Biden hadn't even come close, dropped out. He was
yes,
in second place, dropped out, and Klobuchar. And then good old Elizabeth Warren needed to take some time to find herself and be with her feelings and stuff, and couldn't see the writing on the wall,
no,
and
like, and then with
didn't support her.
Warren, like Warren disappointed me the most of all people, because she like it like if she claims to care about progressive policies and the progressive wing of the party, she should have dropped out after Nevada, because there was nothing showing that she
No,
was going to be able to even come first or second in any other state. And then in her home state on Super Tuesday, she came in third place. Like in Massachusetts. Like she's also from Oklahoma, so like she also came like fourth place in Oklahoma. And like
yeah,
it was like absolutely ridiculous. And if she had possibly dropped out, maybe Bernie wouldn't have, had as bad of a showing on Super Tuesday in some of these states. Like I'm not going to say that her dropping out would have automatically meant Bernie would have gained all of those votes, but
yeah.
if they had,
We'll never know now. That's for
yeah, we'll
sure.
never know now, because it was like, yeah, but like we came so close, and that was like a really great moment. But the last thing I have here is, what kind of music do you listen to? Another one of my fascinations with Canada has been like the music, like some of the rock and metal bands from there, like Nickelback and 3 Days Grace. Like
Yeah,
apparently Nickelback, and I've been told by people that like bands like Nickelback and 3 Days Grace are like way bigger in America than they are in Canada.
possibly. I mean, Nickelback are pretty big, regardless of anywhere. They've written
Yeah.
a number of pretty big songs. In terms of music, me, I mean, I go through different stages where I listen to different stuff. I'm a big fan of like 80s pop, so I listen to a lot of that.
Hmm.
Um, One of my favorite Canadian rock bands is a band called Sloan. I don't know if you're familiar with them. They have a number of really good albums. Um, and Canadian metal bands, like I don't know if you're familiar with Alexis on Fire.
I've heard of them. Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, they're a good Canadian metal band. I know back in the day, like when I was in high school, I was really into kind of like hardcore and death metal stuff. There was a band from Greater Toronto area called Day of Mourning. It was a classic, extremely heavy Canadian like deathcore band, which you might want to check out. But I listen to everything. I go through stages where right now all I want to listen to is Johnny Cash for some reason, and then I'm going to move off that phase, and then I'm going to go into something else. But I'm kind of all over the board when it comes to that. I used to be a musician also, so I don't have any really never strong preference.
That's cool. What about the band Kitty?
I do remember Kitty. Yeah, they were like the female like metal band, right? Were they
Yes.
Canadian? I didn't even know that they were Canadian.
Yeah, they're Canadian.
I I was not aware of. Okay, I think I was aware of that. Yeah. not see when they were in Kitty were popular, I was into like going to like independent metal shows and like church basements and stuff. So I found Kitty in these. I found it very commercial, because they had a music video and on Much Music, which is like Canadian MTV here and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do remember Kitty.
Okay, that's cool.
Classic.
What about the Trues? I've almost never heard a Canadian talk to me about the Trues, and that's like one of the only bands that I know that was like popular in Canada but not America.
Yeah, I'm familiar with them. I don't know if I'm really a fan. Um, I don't know if I could name a Trues song. Um, I think the big Canadian band that I think everyone should probably be familiar with is the Tragically Hip. They're kind of like our national band that were hugely popular here and never really took off in the States.
Yeah, I've never heard of them.
The Tragically Hip, yeah, exactly. Immensely popular band here in Canada, fronted by this guy Gord Downey, who's a very gifted singer and songwriter, and who passed away a year or two ago of brain cancer. It was a very sad, tragic event for rock fans in Canada because if you're kind of my age, mid 30s, he was kind of like a big part of like the soundtrack of like the 90s and early 2000s and stuff. Number of really great songs and also some very good solo albums, Gord Downey. So I would recommend that. I don't know if that's your thing. They're not really metal. It's kind of like bar rock a little bit, like rock and roll.
Mm-hmm.
But a number of very good singles and very good albums. The Tragically Hip.
That's cool.
Yeah,
How do you feel about 3 Days Grace?
I don't really. I think they've got some okay singles. I don't really listen to a lot of the sort of like radio, like hard rock bands. Yeah, I guess it was just I had kind of aged out of that kind of stuff by the time I was like in the time that I would have been maybe into that kind of thing. And I was always more into like more pop music. So like I always kind of gravitated more towards that. But I know they do have a number of big tracks.
Oh yeah.
Sure.
They're huge. They're huge in America too. Like huge. Oh wow.
Yeah, and even Nickelback, Nickelback takes a lot of shit for being, corny or lame or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm not crazy about Chad Kroger's voice. He's like, yeah, like that kind of like hard rock, like kind of voice. Mm-hmm. But I think objectively, a really one of the like an all-time great pop songwriter. Like kind of effortlessly wrote so many like very successful and very catchy singles, which even if you don't really agree with, or if you like the style of music, it's not an easy thing to do to kind of like maintain that level of like chart dominance for that long.
Yeah.
So whether or not you like Nickelback or think they're corny or whatever, I think you have to give it up for the fact that they managed to make such an incredible career for themselves. I was never a huge fan, but I do appreciate what they accomplished. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, like I remember like their songs were always popular when I was like a kid. So like I always heard them on the radio and stuff. I never really became a huge fan of just like most of their hits. But like I didn't know like until I got more on the internet, like after when I got into college a few years ago. I had no idea that everyone hated them so bad. I had no idea. I lived in a bubble. I just thought Nickelback was like this widely accepted and well-liked band. And then I'm like, wait, what's everyone's problem with Nickelback? I thought they were good. And then I was on the internet. I'm like, whoa, like this is crazy. Like I always knew, like I'm a huge fan of Limp Bizkit. Like I always knew Limp Bizkit had a lot of hate thrown their way because I'd read a lot about Limp Bizkit and stuff like that. But Nickelback, I was just like really like taken back by that one. I was like, why do people hate them so much?
Well, part of it is just popularity, right? And with Limp Bizkit as well. I think anything that becomes that level of popularity and like in the like kind of mainstream pop culture, eventually a lot of people are going to be like, it's no longer cool or whatever. So then you kind of like you can position yourself. You can kind of make that part of your persona by hating these things that are popular and cool, because that means that you're a free thinker and everything. So there's an element of that, I think, with both of those bands, definitely. But even Limp Bizkit as well, where I think I can find them pretty corny and obnoxious as well. But again, it's not easy to rise to that level of stature as a band and continue pumping out songs that are like hugely popular. Like there is an artistry to that, whether or not you find it corny or not.
Yeah. And then what was it? Yeah, and then recently Fred Durst of Limp Bizkit and even Nickelback, they came out in support of Black Lives Matter protesters and stuff like that. And I remember there was a lot of people who were like, okay, we're not like, I don't want to hear anyone talk shit about Nickelback or Limp Bizkit ever again. They
Yeah.
said Black Lives Matter, so everyone should shut up and support them. And I was like, yeah, that's right, that's right. They came out. We need to stop hating on them because they're on the right side of
Yeah.
this time.
Yeah, well, it can't be easy though too, because I think if you're a band like Nickelback, you've probably got a wide part of your fan base that's more like the reactionary, like the NASCAR people and the Republicans and you know those types. So it's not easy, I think, if you have that kind of mass appeal, and especially if you appeal to that crowd, to take a stand like that, because it really pisses them off. So I think you gotta hand it to them if they're taking that kind of a stand. That's probably going to like turn off a big chunk of their fan base. But you know, it's important, I think, even that people that appeal to that kind of cross section of folks to take that kind of a stand.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming on. This was really great conversation we had.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Where can we find you on social media and your two podcasts that you're on?
Yeah, I really only use Twitter. I'm on Instagram and TikTok and a number of things, but I just don't use it that much. My Twitter is @Rob_Rousseau. It's just my name. And yeah, the podcasts are. I've been doing 49th Parahell for like 2 years. I just released episode 80 of that last week, and that's the podcast that focuses mostly on Canada. The idea kind of was that when I started doing it, that I could kind of talk about Canada, I could talk about America, like depending on what's happening in the news. But really try as much as I can to relate things back to Canada, even when I'm talking about America, like try to demonstrate how political struggles there are linked here, about how we suffer from the same systemic issues a lot of the time, even if maybe the volume's turned down a little bit. So that's that show, 49th Parahell. I've been doing that for a while. And I just started doing The Insurgents right at the beginning of this primary, because I realized that this primary is starting, and I know this is now all I'm going to talk about for the next couple of months. And I have all these like Canadian listeners that maybe want me to still focus on Canada, that maybe don't want my podcast to turn into like the Bernie Sanders hour. So before the primary, I started doing The Insurgents with my friend Jordan Ewell, and it's been a wild ride. We started it right after Iowa, that disastrous Iowa caucus, and just followed that whole primary through all the different kind of ups and downs of that, and now into this totally unprecedented situation after that no one really predicted, of this global pandemic, economic crisis. Now you have this like national uprising. So we've been covering all that stuff on The Insurgents each week with a lot of really great guests. We have Ken Klippenstein, who sometimes drops into the show, who, despite being banned, he sometimes manages a way to find his way back there often. But I'm happy with the work we've done on that show, covering everything, all the craziness of the primary and everything that's happened after. So that's what we're still going to be doing that each week. Seeing where the rest of 2020 is going to go, who knows? I think it's probably going to be aliens. That's my kind of sleeper pick for what's going to be the next big 2020 storyline. But we'll see. But I've had a great time covering everything on The Insurgents. And you can find both of those podcasts on every podcast app. The Insurgents is on Substack, also theinsurgents.substack.com.
All right, cool. Thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.